My name is Jessica Mosley, and I chose to do the Book of Ages, The Life and Opinions of Jane Franklin by Jill Leopold. I chose this book because of many factors. One, when I looked at the list, I noticed that Jill Leopold was an award-winning author. She had won various awards, and she also has written tons of books. So I decided to look her up and just read a little bit about her before I chose this book. And what she is she's the professor. She's a professor of American history at Harvard University, and she's also a staff writer at the New Yorker. So she's very informative. This book, she actually won an award, a National Book Award for nonfiction finalist for this Book of Ages, and she also won back in 2006 the Pulitzer Prize for History for a book called New York Burning. So she's won various, probably about 7 or 8 awards out of maybe about 10 books. So she seemed very knowledgeable, so I decided to go ahead and read this. I'm not a very avid reader. I really don't like to read, so I downloaded it to my Kindle because usually that makes me read things easier. And I read the book first, and then after I read the book, I decided to break it down a little bit so that you could understand it. First of all, before you even want to know who Jane Franklin is, you want to know who Benjamin Franklin was, her brother. And of course, he is the 10th son out of 17 children of Josiah and Abiah, Josiah's second wife. He was an author, printer, politician, postmaster, scientist, inventor, diplomat. Very, very famous, very, very active back in the 18th century. He became a national hero when he repealed the Unpopular Stamp Act. He also published 14 letters for the New England Courant at the age of 12. He didn't do it under his name, he did it through an alias, but he still publicized those, plus several other ones from the Poor Richard Almanac. He also, back in 1775, was elected to the Second Continental Congress and was a postmaster for the colonies. He was one of the 13th men who drafted the Articles of Confederation. He also drafted and ratified the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. So he was very, very, very popular, very, very educated. And it's all this was from a man who never even finished school. So he shaped his life through most abundant reading, experience. He had a strong moral compass. He had a commitment to civic duty. He had overall wit, good humor, and integrity. So basically, we want to know who Jane was. Jane is totally opposite of her brother. She was very modest and humble. She had a close relationship with him. She was his youngest sister and his closest confidant. She had very limited skills. Back in those days, the women were to stay at home, take care of the children. They were not to get educated. They weren't to be really religious. There were hard times. So basically, she could learn to read, but she couldn't write. So when she turned 6, Ben actually taught her to write. She did misspell quite a bit, especially in her letters that she would write him. She would say Bach instead of book, but you basically could get the gist of it. She also married at the age of 15 to a guy named Edward Mecum. He had a lot of debt and misfortune. They were married for 38 years. They had 12 children. She actually outlived all of them but one. He was always in jail. He was always drunk. He was not a very good husband or father, especially because she was pregnant all the time. He did not help very often with money or anything like that. He was in a lot of debt. And back in those days, that was a bad thing because that's who took care of the family, was the man. So Jane had to really take it upon herself, and with Ben's help, he helped her with, clothes and books and helping out with her children and stuff like that. So he helped her quite a bit, but she had to learn to earn her own money. She boiled soap. She also took in boarders. She also, along with her daughters Polly and Jenny, they established a little small sewing shop, and they sold caps and bonnets. And they got materials from a friend of Ben's from London. So Also, the Book of Ages, that was her book. It was a very small little book, and basically all it was just births and deaths of her children, and it might have had a little bit of scripture from the Bible. But excuse me. Basically, she did correspond with her brother by letters. Um, she was religious. Ben wasn't. She had a large family. Ben didn't. So basically, to summarize this book, it was a nonfiction book that just shed light on Benjamin Franklin's younger sister. They're 6 years apart, very close. Um, he actually, on his 21st birthday, called her his ever my peculiar favorite. So he really did love her. He really did try to take good care of her. And especially during that time, it was hard times. It was during the 18th century. The American Revolution was going on. The Stamp Act was going on. Culture and way of life was just hard. Everybody was experiencing hardships. There were very few opportunities for women to express themselves. There were limited education. There was poor state of medicine in those days, the outrageous infant mortality, and just tons of mentally ill. So it was very bad time for all. When Edward Meekum, her husband, actually died, she actually had to go to court because she had a lot of debt that she had to pay. And back in those times, they would take everything they owned and they would just throw the woman out, on her own. But because the judge knew Ben, she was pardoned. So she ended up being able to pay off her debt and still keep her house and be able to take care of herself. So the very final entry that was in the book, the little book of ages that she wrote, was actually dated September 19th, 1767, which said, "Died my dear and beloved daughter Polly Meekum." And then she put, "Sorrows roll upon me like the waves of the sea." And then the following month she wrote to her brother and she said, "God is sovereign and I submit." So in conclusion, Jane really didn't make history like her brother, but her life was reflected by it. She went through bad times. She married young. She married what we call today a loser. She had to raise her children all by herself. She had to bury her children all by herself. And back then, grief was not a good thing. You had to keep that to yourself. So basically, thanks to her brother, at the end of her life, she had all the things a woman could ask for. She ended up having her own home, her own money. She had all the books that she wanted, and she even had her own spectacles to read them, which, of course, we all know Ben Franklin discovered those. So even though her brother never wrote of her in his books or his letters, you can see in this little mini biography that he truly loved his sister and cared for her well-being, and that family really mattered to him. As far as works cited, I got most of my information from the book that I read, that I downloaded from the Kindle edition from Random House. Also, I got 2 pieces of information from the Washington Post and one from the New York Times that I took information from. And also, since she is a teacher at Harvard University, I was able to download her bio, and the Harvard Gazette has actually wrote a piece on her called "The Tale of Benny and Jenny," which I was able to get information from. So, basically, this book was a great read. I enjoyed it. It kept my attention. It was very informative. I actually read it and didn't get bored with it. So it taught me a great deal about the history during that time, and I'm glad I chose that one to read. So thank you for your time.